So for the final video of the pay model, let's actually go through the pay model. You will not need to memorize this pay model. You will have the textbook and your notes available to you during the test, but I can go through at least the policies and objectives in this video. And then in the next few weeks, we'll go through some of those techniques that are listed here so that you understand a little bit how we get from these policies to the objectives. So let's start out with that last column of objectives. What are some of the objectives of our compensation systems? And usually we have a little bit of all of these objectives. It's not like you have to focus on one, though you may need to maximize one of these at any one time for a quarter or a year or something because things are changing in your industry. Maybe you're going through a recession. Perhaps you're a startup. So some of these might be more important at different times in your business than others. The first objective is efficiency. Almost all companies really focus on efficiency. This is about controlling labor costs, which is, again, often the biggest cost that employers have. So they really need to be concerned about their labor costs and making sure that if they're paying their employees well, that those employees are actually being productive and kind of paying for themselves at, as part of the strategy for that company. You also want to use your compensation to improve performance among employees, improve the quality of the work, of the products or the services they're making, help them to satisfy customers and shareholders. So there might be many different stakeholders that care about your compensation system in different ways, and you have to think about how to stay efficient, but also to address the concerns of those stakeholders. A second and fundamental objective is fairness and equity. If you don't have fairness in your compensation system, it's really not going to work to be able to attract and maintain employees. And our textbook talks about two kinds of equity or fairness. There are actually many more than this, but we'll just focus on these two because our book mentions them. One is procedural equity or procedural fairness, and this is fairness around the process that's used to make pay decisions. So how do we determine who gets a pay increase, for example? Or how do we determine the base pay for a new job that we're creating? And a lot of procedural fairness is also around transparency. Do your employees know what what is being considered in terms of their pay or how they can increase their pay and that sort of thing? Distributive justice is fairness around the results of pay decisions. So how much each employee is being paid, how much pay increase you're going to give a specific employee. Are you going to give them a merit increase in their base pay? Are you going to give them a bonus? That sort of thing. Compliance is the third objective, and all compensation systems have to worry about compliance, although this can be a bigger objective in some organizations or industries than others. And this is really about conforming to federal and state compensation laws and regulations. We'll learn an overview of some of these laws because they affect how we create and how we maintain our compensation systems. But compliance can be more important in industries like banking, for example, where there's just more regulation around the way that they do business than something like retail, where they still have federal and state compensation laws they have to follow, but there are just fewer of them. And then finally, ethics. Ethics is really about how employees are meeting the strategic objectives or goals of the organization, and organizations care about how results are achieved, because if you're doing something in an unethical way, not only will it likely result in not meeting your strategy goal or objective, or at least in the long term, but it can actually lead to business failure because you might have corrupt business practices. You might be out of compliance, for example, with federal and state compensation laws. So ethics really matters, and we'll talk about that throughout the semester as well. Pay objectives guide the design of our pay system, which is what we'll learn about in the next few weeks. And these objectives serve as a standard for judging the success of our pay system. If we're able to meet these objectives with the pay system that we create, then that means our pay system is very successful. If we can't meet one or more of those objectives, or if we're not meeting them in the way that we intended to, then we may have to go back and kind of figure out in that pay model, what do we need to change to meet that objective going into the future? So how we meet those objectives starts with those 4 policy choices. So this is the first column of that pay model. And we have always 4 policy choices that we have to make decisions around. The first is internal alignment. And this is how are people within the organization paid compared to each other. So for example, you might have people at the same level, but with the same job title, but with different background and experience or different levels of education. How are you going to pay those employees? Is an internal alignment question. Will they be paid all the same because they're in the same job title? Do they get pay increases for every year they're there? Do some people get paid more because they have more education or they came in with more experience than others? Are there ways that employees can actually increase their pay by getting more experience or getting more education or certifications, that sort of thing? So internal alignment is usually around how different employees within the same company are paid. External competitiveness is how pay compares across competitors. So if you have an employee in the same position in one organization versus another, how is their pay similar or different to each other? Do they get the same kind of base salary? Are they being offered the same kinds of benefits? That sort of thing. When we were talking about earlier in the first video with some employers paying more than competitors, that's external competitiveness. If you are paying more than competitors in your industry for the same employees, that's an external competitiveness decision. How our employees contribute and how we define those contributions and how we reward them is another decision we have to make. So for example, if you're at a factory, one way that you can reward your employees is for every widget you make, you're going to get this much money. But if, say, you're creating cars, you could be paying individual employees for every whatever part they have to make, whatever part they're making, or you could be rewarding them as a team. For every car they make together, they get a certain amount of increase or incentive on their base pay. That would be, individual pay versus team pay for the same kind of thing that you're making in your factory. So there are different ways that we can think about how we're rewarding employees and what their contributions are going to be in the workplace. And then finally, these management choices also matter in terms of management. How are we managing all of these choices? And then the people working within our organization who are, making compensation for the work that they're doing. So management means ensuring that the right people, which means you have to use compensation to attract the right people and to keep them in your company, get the right pay for achieving the right objectives in the right way. And this little green box, if you want to burn that into your memory, that actually will tell you about all of the objectives we just talked about. That's the last column of that pay model. We care about things like, meeting compliance laws, so federal and state laws, doing things in an ethical manner, that sort of thing. That's what this green box is encapsulating right here. So these are all the things that we're going to talk about throughout this semester with this pay model, but this is a good introduction to talking about some of the decisions that organizations have to make when they're creating their compensation system.